the National Video Game Museum. Located inside the Frisco Discovery Center in Frisco, Texas, they officially opened their doors on April 2nd of 2016. With an absolutely massive collection, the museum houses over 20,000 different video game related items and memorabilia. It was an absolutely amazing experience for me, to say the least, being able to see such a huge part of video games past. So join me right now as we take a tour of the National Video Game Museum. As soon as you walk in, the massive display gets you in the mood to look at the rest of the museum right away, as they have multiple screens showing tons of different commercials, video games, and gold-plated consoles from the past few console generations. I stood here in awe for quite a few minutes, just absorbing all the nostalgia coming out from my childhood of the 80s and 90s, as I looked at the history of games for the past 30 or 40 years coming from every direction. Although those gold consoles looked cool, I couldn't help but feel a little sad that they probably would never be playable again, but it did make for an absolutely awesome display. The museum is divided into multiple stages which talk about different aspects of video games past, with stage 1 referring to all the different versions of Pong, and boy are there a lot of versions of Pong. The display ended with a giant Pong machine that you could actually play. Stage 2 begins with a giant Mario statue standing out in front of the area and shows basically every home console to ever exist, along with interesting facts about the consoles that you can access through Super Nintendo style controllers. Stage 3 gets into third-party games and peripherals, including unauthorized versions of Nintendo games made by Tengen, such as Tetris. I always found that funny back in the NES days, that Nintendo had a seal of quality that they had to put on all of their games to make them official, and for quality control purposes to keep games of lower quality from entering the market. Because we all know that every game on the Nintendo had the best quality. The next area that I found really interesting was all the different controllers that they had on display. Everything from common controllers like the Genesis and Nintendo, to more unusual ones like the ColecoVision and the large Typing of the Dead display that you see in the front. This was similar to the House of the Dead Dreamcast and arcade game, except that instead of using a light gun to shoot the zombies, you would use a keyboard that would plug into the Sega Dreamcast and would have to type out specific words and sentences that would appear on the screen in order to shoot the zombies. It would have been nice to have this game instead of that boring Mavis Beacon. I'd be a lot better typer now. They also had the absolutely terrible U-Force controller, Power Glove, Power Pad, and more. Next was a mock setup of what a video game store would have looked like in the 1980s, with the most unusual and rare item being the Vectrex home console. Released in 1982, it was the only home console of its type to feature vector-style graphics. The rest of the store display showed empty video game boxes, posters on the wall for vintage games, and even a used bin for discounted games such as Frogger. Next we get to an Atari display showing the rise and fall of video games, with the infamous E.T. prominently displayed on the front. I took a chance to play E.T. for a little bit, and trust me, it is just as terrible as you remember. It definitely deserved its fate of being buried in the desert. The next display shows the rise of home computers as we look at gaming-focused computer consoles through the years. I apologize for the flickering on some displays, by the way. I didn't have my usual camera equipment with me, just my phone. But besides a few PC peripherals in the center of the display, the most interesting part of this section was looking at the various different gaming PCs that have existed throughout the years, all the way from the very beginning. While I wasn't a very big PC gamer myself in the 80s and 90s, I was mainly a console gamer. It was still very cool to see working versions of the Commodore 64, Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and other PCs running at that time current games on their hardware. Right around the corner from that was a really neat Super Mario World display, with tons of stickers, badges, pins, and other gaming related items on the wall. Next to that was an original Dragon's Lair arcade game which came out in 1983. At that time, I'm sure it was amazing for kids to go into an arcade and see full animation on a video game. And even though you could argue whether it's really a game or not, it definitely lives up to its reputation as a quarter muncher. I lost quite a few tokens to this one before I even figured out what I was doing half the time. Next, we moved into an area that had every handheld video game console imaginable. More common systems such as every version of the Game Boy, Game Gear, Atari Lynx, and all Sony systems were on display, as well as more obscure ones such as the Game.com and the old Mr. Game & Watch series from Nintendo. But you could actually go and play some of these games on these systems. That was definitely one of my favorite aspects of this museum, was how hands-on it was. I was pretty glad they didn't have a playable N-Gage though. Ugh, no thanks. Next, they had a full display of the infamous Super Mario Bros. Movie released in 1993. It even contained some original props from the film, such as Princess Daisy's dress, and some of the original plumbing tools that they carried on set. This small display I can't do justice because it was more of an auditory experience than anything, but it was one of my favorite displays in that you could listen to audio from many different popular franchises such as Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VII, and Super Mario Bros., and hear different versions of what the music would have sounded like had it played on different systems. For example, if you ever wanted to know what Devil May Cry would sound like on the original Nintendo, or Chrono Trigger on the Genesis, you could listen to that here. The next display had to do with online gaming, as you could send messages from one computer to another, seeing the speed in which the message would travel depending on the time period that you had selected. Looking at it, there was a massive difference between 1998 and 2001 as people began to switch from dial-up to broadband internet. The next display involved virtual reality and had displays and games from their inception, all the way through the PlayStation VR, which you could try out for yourself, as well as the Virtual Boy, which gave me a headache after about 2 minutes of playing. Next, there was a small display for people who are interested on what the inside of a game cartridge looks like, as they offer an exploded view of various cartridges from different consoles. Next, I went to visit the rare games and peripherals section of the museum, which offered a glimpse of rare versions of common consoles, different merchandising from game stores, and the contents of the boxes that came with these rare games. As I was looking through these games and how rare some of them were, I started to realize how much just this section alone of the museum was worth, as some of these games, consoles, and peripherals can go for as much as a few $100 to a few $1,000s if you would find the right buyer. Even assuming some of these items were donated, I imagine that the creators of the museum had to pay a pretty penny to get a lot of these items on display. And as I was looking on in amazement at the sheer volume of these rare pieces of gaming history sitting right in front of me, I saw something that I never thought I would see in person. The Nintendo World Championships. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This gray version has gone for anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. The gold version is even more ridiculous, and although someone claimed a bid of $100,000 in 2014, the bid was fake and it was never sold at that price. Even so, there was a confirmed sale in 2014 of the cart, which still fetched $30,000. Just being able to see something so rare right in front of me was without a doubt one of the coolest things in this entire museum. I'm honestly really surprised that this game didn't have its own display. Another cool thing I really liked was they had a Nintendo 64 DD, or disk drive, which was only released in Japan previously. In addition to that were original versions of Earthbound for the Super Nintendo, the gold versions of both Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link for the NES, and the Ocarina of Time for the N64, and tons of other rare Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation games. Way too many things to list. I did catch a few games in there that I already owned, so that was pretty cool too. The next area was really awesome in that it was a complete replica of a 1980s bedroom and what it might look like to a teenager at that time. They had 1980s posters, bed sheets, jackets, and even a Nintendo with Duck Hunt and Mario Brothers that you could play on an old CRT TV. All the while 1980s music played in the background. Next, you went over to what a 1980s living room might look like, with a Laserdisc player, 1980s furniture, and an old console-style TV where you could play the game Burger Time. Even board games weren't left out of the equation either, as they had video game-based board games on display as well, from Pac-Man, Frogger, and Centipede to The Legend of Zelda. One of my other favorite displays involved the Game Genie, Game Shark, and other cheat devices. I had a lot of great memories of these devices when I was a kid. If there was ever a game that my friends and I couldn't beat, we would always wait for new codebooks to come in the mail to help us beat the game, and be super excited when we'd get one that we wanted, since there was no real internet to just look codes up like you can now. Getting to the last parts of our journey, one of my favorite displays easily was this giant wall with tons of different video game characters on it. And along with that, they had many different generations of consoles that you could play. You could sit down at a Nintendo and play Contra, or at an Xbox and play some Halo. Again, I absolutely loved how hands-on this museum was. It was one of the best aspects of it. One of the last stages, Stage 16, led to more game consoles that you could play, and in addition to some old-school gaming posters and neon signs, they also had two giant statues of Master Chief from Halo and Gabriel Belmont / Dracula from Castlevania Lords of Shadow 1 and 2. And as I said, on the other side there were more consoles you could play, such as the Sega Saturn, Xbox 360, and Atari Jaguar. Finally guys, the last leg of our journey leads us to an 80s/90s style arcade with tons of different arcade games inside. Right away when you enter the museum, you're given tokens to spend in the arcade with the option to buy more if you want to keep playing. The arcade tends to focus more on 80s games such as Joust, Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Rampage. However, there are a couple of 90s games there too, such as Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. Since I was a little more of a 90s kid than an 80s kid, I was a little disappointed that there weren't more 90s style games there. NBA Jam Tournament Edition is my all-time favorite, but it was still amazing looking and felt like a true arcade, one that you just don't see anymore nowadays. All in all, the National Video Game Museum was an amazing experience and one that I'll never forget. They do also give you motivation to go back in that they change the games out once in a while that you can play and have different themes there depending on the time of year that it is. If any of you guys can ever make it down to Texas, I highly recommend you check this museum out as it's a great time. Hey everybody, well I hope you enjoyed the tour of the National Video Game Museum. I wanted to take this chance to thank you guys once again, sincerely. We're at almost 250 subscribers now. I really appreciate all you guys' support, everybody that leaves comments, everybody that leaves me helpful feedback. It's very appreciated. I also wanted to ask you guys, what do you guys want to see from this channel? What do you enjoy most? What do you like? What do you dislike? I really want to know what your favorite and not so favorite aspects of this channel are. I want to keep sticking with retrospectives as that's the main theme of this channel, but I do want to supplement still with doing lots of reviews. I had recently done a Mega Man 11 review and plan to do more, as I enjoy doing them, and I think it's a good way to supplement content in between the retrospectives since they take me so long to do, especially with all the research and editing that goes into them. At some point I was also thinking about starting a weekly gaming news show to further supplement the content, because I thought it'd be a good idea to take a look at things that are currently going on in the industry as well as look back at its past. With that thought in mind, I am looking at different ideas for sets that I can put up, where I could be on camera more and talk to you guys face to face in addition to doing voiceover. So those are some other things that I'm looking at right now. So let me know down below guys, would that be something you'd be interested in seeing? Or would there be any other things that you would want me to cover? Let me know. Because ultimately this channel is nothing without you guys, the viewers, so your input is very important to me. And if you guys like this video and want to learn more about the history of games, I'll leave links down in the description below for you and title cards up there as well for games that I've already done retrospectives on or I'm currently working on. Thanks everybody, and I'll see you on the next video.